back there.
Yeah. Given the success of Wikipedia, do you think that, for example, Britannica is going to be commercially viable in the future? And do you think this is a good or a bad thing?
So it's a really good question. So one of the interesting things is that the sales of Brockhaus are actually up about 30% since the founding of Wikipedia. And so what do you make of that? Well, it may be a little bit misleading because they just, about a year ago, I think, they released their first new edition in like 5 years. And so obviously they would have a boost in sales because they have a new edition out. And it may not say something about the long-term viability. We do know of, in several places, older traditional encyclopedias, a few of them have closed already. And then Britannica itself. Britannica was already reeling long before we came along. Britannica had a very difficult, two big difficult transitions. First of all, they used to have a sales model that involved having door-to-door salespeople. And with the rise of axe murderers, this is not necessarily the best way to sell things anymore. Actually, it's not so much that. It's with the rise of women in the workforce. People aren't at home all day like they used to be, so sending around people to sell something may not work as well. They had a really difficult transition from that because they had this huge sales force, very well-paid sales force, that was their main distribution channel, who would absolutely flip out if they tried to sell through any other method. They had to wrestle with that problem as a company. Then additionally, Microsoft put out Encarta at a very low subsidized price. That almost killed Britannica because people would say, I'll just get Encarta on a DVD when I need to buy $1,000 worth of books. And then Wikipedia came along, which has really changed things a lot as well. I think that the right way forward for that type of encyclopedia is to some extent, they should really consider embracing free culture. One of the things that, for example, Brockhaus, one of the major expenses, I read once, 50% of the cost of producing the encyclopedia is the licensing fees that they pay for the images in the encyclopedia. Well, when they get ready to do the next edition of Brockhaus, they would be foolish to go out and do that when they can go to Wikimedia Commons and get many, many, many very useful, very nice images for free and use them. They can go to Flickr and get images if they want to. There's lots of ways they can cut their costs by taking advantage of the fact that so much is being available free. So that helps a lot, right, if they can cut their costs in that way. Another thing that a traditional encyclopedia might do is to recognize what is the real value of the Britannica brand. The real value is it's a certain kind of stamp of authority, a stamp of approval. It's that stamp that has value, not their production method. It's as long as they put out a good quality product and people feel like I can trust it because it has the Britannica name on it, that could be good. So one of the things they could do, which I very much doubt if they would do, would be take Wikipedia entries, stamp them with the Britannica brand, and sell it. Basically, they wouldn't want to do it blindly, but they would want to say, actually, we found Wikipedia was 90% decent and 10% garbage. And so we went through and had experts take out the 10% of garbage, and now we've got something really good. And we were able to triple the size of Britannica, improve the quality by taking advantage of this work, but we are also adding value on top, and that's something they could do. I kind of think they won't because they're very old-fashioned. But the other thing they can do is, and they actually do recognize this, that Britannica is both a knowledge product and furniture. So lots of people buy Britannica because they want just a little taste of this feel here, right? For me, I would buy a very old copy of Britannica to get the right feel, but people they understand that it's something that people like to have, the physical, they're very beautiful books and all that. So as long as they recognize that value, that's another sort of angle for them. But I think it's going to be difficult. I think it's definitely going to be difficult for them.
Yeah, I was interested that you talked about the possibility of a wiki jury. I was reading the other week about a political party in Holland that decided to have a wiki manifesto. I was just wondering, how far do you think the principles of Wikipedia and wikis in general, kind of technically tokenism, could they transform society, or is it just restricted to knowledge?
So So I tend to be a little bit utopian about these kinds of things, but a little bit cautious as well. I actually got a great book. There's a book called The Victorian Internet. And what this book is about, it's about the invention of the telegraph. And basically, the one of the main premises of the book is that the invention of the telegraph was, in many ways, a much more radical change to society than the invention of the internet. Because the time it took to get a message from London to New York, in the space of 10 years from the invention of the telegraph, went from some weeks by ship to instantaneous. To get a message from New York to Chicago, again, really transformative. And what was interesting around that time is that there was a lot of techno-utopianism at the time, where there were authors who said things like, one of the things we know is that a lot of wars happen because of misinformation and miscommunication. And so now that the governments can talk to each other in real time, we'll have a lot fewer misunderstandings and a lot less fighting caused by that. Also, additionally, in order to support and sustain a people's motivation for a war, a big part of it is dehumanizing the other. And as we have a technology like telegraph where people can make friends and talk point to point, and they can actually, an ordinary Englishman can talk to an ordinary German, then they become friends, and it becomes all that more difficult to sustain war. And so people were saying this very optimistic about the future of peace because of the invention of the telegraph. And then we had the 20th century, which was pretty much a fiasco, right? And so I think that's a cautionary tale, because right now it's really easy to think about these kinds of technologies and say, wow, it really is something that ordinary people, peer-to-peer, connected in this new way. You have email friends who live in other countries. It makes it almost unthinkable that you could have a war. That sounds pretty plausible, but we should be a little cautious about being too optimistic. So your question, though, was a little more detailed. It was about wiki editing, this kind of using technical tools like this to allow people to work together to create a consensus, that kind of thing. I think there's a lot of potential. One of the problems that we have is that on many, many issues. So right now, if you go on the internet or you go anywhere and you're looking for information, you want to better understand what's going on with Israel and Palestine. You can find lots and lots of propaganda on both sides, right? People who have an agenda and they want to, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's an opinion, it's whatever, but it's really hard to find just sort of a central summary of what happened and a summary of who said what and why did they disagree, except Wikipedia. Wikipedia is really great at that. And generally, it's quite a good place to go to find out. I was just looking at there's the Jenin massacre, as it was called, or the Battle of Jenin, depending on how you look at it. But the article is pretty good. It describes kind of what happened and what different people have claimed about it, and you come away with an understanding of what happened there. So it's pretty good. But let's imagine that someone is wanting to build a new road. A new large highway through somewhere near Oxford, and you see this big debate locally about it, and you typically get exactly that. You get two sides, right? You get the people who have a financial interest in the road being built, and the people who have a financial interest in it not being built. You have environmentalists. You have different people weighing in on the subject, but they're all pretty much, you can look at their affiliation and guess exactly what they're going to say, and whether there's actually any information in that is really hard to say. As opposed to, suppose you brought all those people together from different sides and you kind of forced them to say, we want you to edit this wiki together, because what we want you to produce, even though you're on different sides, is produce a document, a white paper for the rest of us that contains all the things that you agree on. That can actually be really valuable if it's successful. It's kind of hard to do, right? It's kind of hard to wrangle those people into sitting down and doing it, but actually you can get ordinary citizens who represent those viewpoints to do it. And I think there's a lot of hope in that kind of thing. So that if I'm thinking of voting and I say, you know what, I understand sometimes we need to build a new road and sometimes we shouldn't build the new road. And so I'm amenable to being swayed by arguments, but I really want to get the facts first. Hopefully that people could come together and produce that in a way that's a lot more neutral than in the past, maybe.